What if the world underestimated you, and you didn't say a word, until it was too late? The roar of her Superbike engine was like a challenge to the silence around her. Tasha Lee, dressed in a sleek black leather jacket, zipped past the traffic on her super-fast machine, weaving effortlessly between cars as the wind whipped through her hair. She wasn't just any rider. She was on a mission no one could guess. Her heart raced with the thrill of the ride. But there was also something else, something bigger, something the world didn't know about her. Behind those dark sunglasses, Tasha had a secret, one that would turn everything upside down. The flashing lights of police sirens suddenly cut through the air as Tasha's speed slowed down. She didn't panic. She wasn't worried. She knew they would stop her. She was ready for it. The officer in the black patrol car pulled up behind her, the blaring sirens now louder. "Pull over," the officer shouted through the megaphone, and Tasha smoothly eased her Superbike to the shoulder of the road, stopping in front of the officer. She took off her helmet, letting her thick, dark hair fall free. The officer stepped out of his car, his boots hitting the pavement with a purposeful thud. "License and registration," he demanded, but his voice wasn't just stern. It was laced with an unmistakable tone of judgment. He eyed her, a woman on a Superbike, black and wearing dark shades, and all the bias in the world played out in his mind. "You got any idea how fast you were going?" He sneered, tapping his foot impatiently as he scribbled on his ticket book. Tasha didn't flinch. She knew this routine. "I was just riding," she said calmly, her voice steady. The officer looked her up and down, his eyes scanning her clothes, her body language. To him, she was just another reckless rider, another woman of color in a fast bike. "I'm going to need to write you up for speeding and reckless driving," he said, clearly enjoying the power he held in the situation. "Hand me your papers." Tasha raised an eyebrow, but remained calm. There was no fear in her eyes, no hint of nervousness. She reached into her jacket pocket, but instead of handing him the usual documents, she pulled out a shiny, official-looking badge. Slowly, with deliberate care, she flashed it at him. "FBI," she said softly, her voice unwavering. For a second, the officer's eyes flickered with confusion, then disbelief. "What? You? FBI?" His words caught in his throat. He looked at the badge again, his expression turning from confidence to unease. The shift was immediate, like a switch had been flipped. Tasha stood still, watching the man's face turn pale. Her cool demeanor contrasted sharply with his growing panic. "I'm an agent," she said, her tone cold but controlled. The officer glanced back at his patrol car, fumbling for his radio. "Wait here," he mumbled, his voice shaky. Tasha didn't move. She didn't have to. This was the moment when everything changed. The officer turned, his face flushed with embarrassment and confusion, as he reached for the radio. His grip was weak, like he wasn't sure what to do next. He spoke into the device, but his words were barely audible. "I need backup, now." Tasha didn't even blink. She knew what was coming. Within seconds, a second patrol car pulled up, the officers inside also confused but trying not to show it. They got out slowly, staring at Tasha as if they'd seen a ghost. The officer who first stopped her returned, now visibly sweating. "Ma'am," he said, his voice much more respectful than before. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. I'll need to check your credentials." Tasha smiled slightly, the corners of her lips twitching with amusement at the shift in tone. "Of course," she said, still calm, still in control. She watched as the officers huddled, whispering in low voices, probably trying to figure out how to handle this situation that had spiraled out of their control. The moment stretched on, tense and awkward. As Tasha waited, she could feel the weight of the moment settle around them. For the first time, the officers were the ones on edge. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Tasha could feel the judgment they'd thrown at her, the presumption that she was nothing more than a woman on a fast bike. But now, as the truth unraveled, they were forced to face their own bias. The officer returned after what felt like an eternity. He was no longer confident. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We made an error. Please, have a safe ride." Tasha didn't say another word. She nodded once, and without missing a beat, she put her helmet back on, revved the engine, and sped off into the horizon, leaving the officers standing there, frozen in their own mistake, and realizing that sometimes the world isn't always what it seems. The sound of the bike engine roaring to life was like a breath of fresh air. Tasha Lee, now in full control of the situation, felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. She had played the game exactly how she needed to, and the result was clear. The officers were left standing behind, frozen, with their judgmental glances quickly turning into a mix of confusion and embarrassment. As the wind hit her face, she could feel the weight of their stares lingering, but she was no longer concerned. She had made her point, and nothing could take that away from her. The road stretched out before her, an endless horizon of freedom. Tasha leaned forward, gripping the handlebars tighter as the Superbike surged forward. The thrill of the ride was what she lived for. The adrenaline coursed through her veins, making her feel alive in ways nothing else could. But today, it wasn't just the speed that exhilarated her. It was the sweet taste of justice, of making a statement without saying a word. As she sped down the highway, the city skyline began to fade in the distance, replaced by the open road ahead. Tasha had spent years working her way up in the FBI, fighting against everything the world expected of her. As a woman of color in a predominantly male, white-dominated agency, she had always had to prove herself. But this moment, this small victory against the officers who had judged her simply by her appearance, was a reminder that she didn't need to explain herself to anyone. She had earned her place. The freedom to ride, to live without limits, was something she had fought for her entire life. The wind whipped past her, the rush of speed pushing all other thoughts aside. For a few brief moments, she allowed herself to forget about the judgment, the struggles, and the constant battle for recognition. It was just her, the bike, and the open road. But even in this moment of freedom, the shadows of her past lingered. She had come a long way since the days when people would dismiss her, assuming she was nothing more than a stereotype. But those days were behind her now. Her badge, her training, and her relentless pursuit of justice were what defined her, not the color of her skin or the assumptions people made based on her appearance. She had learned to rise above it all, to stand tall in the face of adversity, and to never let anyone dictate her worth. As Tasha approached an intersection, her bike slowed slightly as she took in the familiar sights of the city. The towering buildings, the busy streets, and the constant hum of activity reminded her of the world she had worked so hard to navigate. Despite the progress she had made, there were still moments when she felt the weight of the world's expectations bearing down on her. But she had learned how to carry it. She had learned how to turn every obstacle into an opportunity, every challenge into a stepping stone towards something greater. As she stopped at a red light, Tasha's mind briefly wandered to the faces of the officers she had left behind. They had looked at her with skepticism, with doubt, because of the color of her skin and the way she carried herself. But in the end, it was she who had the power, not them. They had been forced to confront their own biases, to question their own assumptions. Tasha knew that wasn't something they would forget anytime soon. As the light turned green, she gave the bike a gentle rev and accelerated forward, leaving the intersection behind her. The streets were starting to quiet down as the city's pulse slowed with the passing of time. She could feel the tension of the day begin to lift, replaced by the calm of the evening. She had done what she came to do. She had reminded those officers that they weren't the only ones with power, that she had the strength to stand up for herself and for what was right. And in that moment, as the wind continued to rush past her and the city faded away, behind her, Tasha felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the victory over the officers, but the realization that she had finally reached a place where she could simply exist without fear, without doubt. She had proven that she was more than just a woman on a bike. She was an FBI agent, and that was all that mattered. The night had settled in, and the city lights below were like a blanket of stars. Tasha Lee found herself on a quiet rooftop, looking out over the skyline. The cool breeze tugged at her leather jacket, and the hum of the city below seemed distant, almost like a memory fading into the background. She had completed her assignment for the day, but her mind was still racing. It wasn't just about the confrontation with the officers anymore. That was just the beginning. No, it was the quiet realization that she was making a difference, that her presence, her very existence, was changing the way people saw the world. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, watching the fog of her breath mix with the cool air. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her partner, Marcus. "We need to meet. Tomorrow." Same place. No explanation, no extra words. Just the usual code. She smiled to herself. Marcus had been a good partner. Loyal, focused, and never once questioned her decisions, even when things seemed off the rails. He knew she was capable, and he trusted her judgment. In this line of work, trust was everything. It wasn't about gender, race, or any of the things that people outside the agency obsessed over. It was about trust and results. Tasha put her phone back in her pocket and stood up, stretching her arms above her head. She was tired, but it was a good kind of tired. A productive kind of tired. She had proven herself today, not just to the officers on the side of the road, but to herself. The sense of doubt that had haunted her in the past was slowly slipping away. She had earned her place. She belonged here. Her mind wandered back to the moment with the officers. The way they had looked at her with surprise, with uncertainty. The shift in their attitudes when they realized who she really was. It was a small victory, but it was hers. And it reminded her of something important. That the world was full of assumptions, full of people who thought they knew who you were based on the way you looked or what they thought you were capable of. But the truth always had a way of coming out, sometimes when you least expected it. Tasha stepped away from the edge of the rooftop, walking towards the door that led back into the building. The cold night air had made her feel alive, but now, it was time to get back to work. There were more challenges ahead, more obstacles to face. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned to embrace the discomfort, to thrive in the unknown. And that was what made her stronger than anyone who had ever doubted her. As she walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoed in the quiet building. She passed by a few colleagues, their faces lit by the glow of computer screens. None of them knew what she had done today, what she had accomplished. But that was fine. She didn't need their approval. She was part of something bigger than all of them, something that didn't require recognition. As she reached her office, she paused for a moment, taking in the familiar surroundings. The photos on the walls, the desk piled with paperwork, the quiet hum of the air conditioning. It all felt normal, and yet, she knew it wasn't. The world outside this office was changing, and she was a part of that change. Tasha sat down at her desk, opening her laptop and starting to go through the reports. But even as she worked, her mind kept drifting back to the encounter with the officers. The way they had treated her, so certain that they knew her before they even spoke to her. It was a reminder that no matter how far she'd come, there would always be people who judged her based on her appearance. But she had learned to turn that judgment into fuel. It was a reminder of why she had to keep going, why she had to keep proving them wrong. She wasn't just a woman on a bike. She was an FBI agent, and that was all that mattered. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Marcus. Be there at 9 a.m. Don't be late. She smiled, feeling the familiar rush of excitement. There was work to be done, and she was ready for it. She closed her laptop, stood up, and walked out of the office. As she stepped into the elevator, she glanced at her reflection in the mirrored doors. For the first time in a long while, she liked what she saw. A woman who had earned her place. A woman who had fought for everything she had. And she was just getting started. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across Tasha Lee's office. The silence in the room was palpable, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Tasha leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen in front of her, the case file laid out neatly on her desk. She had been through this 100 times before, but today felt different. Today, she was on the verge of something bigger. As she glanced at the clock, her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Meet at the warehouse. 10 a.m. sharp. Bring everything. No explanation. Just like always. She smiled to herself, the thrill of the unknown settling in her chest. There was no turning back now. As she grabbed her jacket and walked toward the door, her mind wandered back to the previous night. It had been a quiet evening after the encounter with the officers. She had expected to feel relief, a sense of closure, but instead, there had been a quiet hum in the back of her mind. The city had felt different as she rode home, the weight of the streets somehow heavier. Tasha had spent years learning to push aside the doubts, the second-guessing, but every now and then, they crept back. And last night, they had crept in. The reminder that people saw her for who they thought she was, not for who she truly was. But she had faced that before. The world was full of people who made judgments based on assumptions, based on what they saw. She had learned to use that to her advantage. It was why she kept moving forward, why she never stopped proving them wrong. But today, As she drove toward the warehouse, those thoughts had receded. She was ready. She had to be. The warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette outlined against the morning sky. Tasha parked her car at the entrance and stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel as she approached the heavy door. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the empty space as she pushed it open, stepping inside. Marcus was already there, standing near the corner with his arms crossed. He looked up as she entered, a slight nod of acknowledgement the only greeting. "We've got a situation," he said, his voice low. Tasha's eyes narrowed as she moved closer. "What kind of situation?" she asked, her tone steady, but her mind racing. Marcus didn't hesitate. "We've been watching the target for weeks. Last night, they made a move. A big one." He handed her a file, and Tasha took it, flipping it open. Her eyes scanned the pages quickly, taking in the information. It was a high-stakes operation, one that had the potential to bring down a major syndicate. The details were precise: locations, names, dates, but it was the urgency in Marcus' voice that caught her attention. "How big are we talking?" she asked, her gaze meeting his. "Big enough that we can't wait any longer. We're going in tonight." Tasha's pulse quickened, her instincts kicking in. She could feel the familiar adrenaline surge, the rush that came with knowing they were about to make a significant move. But there was also a weight on her shoulders. They had been in this position before, on the edge of something major. But the stakes were higher now. The people they were up against were more dangerous than ever. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Marcus looked at her for a moment, as if weighing the decision. Then he spoke. "We split up. You'll be on the inside, getting the intel. I'll cover the outside, make sure nothing goes wrong." Tasha nodded. She didn't need to ask any more questions. She trusted Marcus with her life. They had worked together long enough to know how the other operated. She grabbed the gear she needed and moved toward the back of the warehouse, where they kept their equipment. As she strapped on her vest, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility settling over her once again. It was what she had chosen, what she had worked for. But sometimes she wondered if she was ready. Ready for what? She pushed the thought aside. There was no time for hesitation. "We'll take them down," she muttered to herself, as much for her own reassurance as for the task ahead. The warehouse door closed behind her with a quiet thud, and she stepped out into the bright light of the morning. The city was alive, bustling with people who had no idea what was about to happen. Tasha had learned long ago to focus on the task at hand, to block out everything else. She had to be ready. Tonight, everything changed. It always did, one way or another. The mission was set, the plan was in motion, and Tasha Lee was ready for whatever came next. The night had fallen, and the dim glow of the warehouse lights flickered as Tasha Lee moved silently through the shadows. Her boots barely made a sound as she crossed the cold concrete floor, the mission weighing heavily on her shoulders. The place was quiet, too quiet. She knew that silence was never a good sign. She glanced at the clock on her wrist. It was time. The plan was simple: get inside, gather the information, and get out before anyone noticed she was there. She trusted Marcus to cover the outside, but she also knew that things rarely went as planned. Her heart rate remained steady, each beat syncing with her calculated steps. She reached the back door of the building, the one they had scouted earlier. The lock clicked open with a soft turn of her wrist, and she slipped inside without a sound. The air inside smelled of rust and dust, a stark contrast to the crisp night air outside. As she moved deeper into the warehouse, she adjusted her equipment and checked her surroundings. The room ahead was dark, but she could see the faint glow of a computer screen through the crack in the door. Her target was just on the other side. Tasha took a deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit office. The low hum of the computer filled the room, and the faint light from the screen cast long shadows on the walls. Her target, a man in his mid-40s, sat at the desk, his back turned to her. She couldn't see his face, but she could sense his presence, the confidence with which he worked, oblivious to the world outside. Tasha's eyes narrowed. She had done her homework. This man was key to the syndicate's operations, and if she could get the intel from his computer, it would be a huge win. She crept closer, moving like a shadow, her movements calculated and precise. The man never heard her approach, too focused on whatever was on his screen. Tasha reached the desk, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the chair. She didn't make a sound, her every motion a silent whisper in the night. Slowly, She leaned over the man's shoulder, her eyes scanning the screen. A set of numbers and codes filled the display, but it was the file labeled Operations Log that caught her attention. She couldn't risk making any noise, so she quietly clicked on the file and began downloading the data onto her flash drive. The seconds felt like minutes, the tension building in her chest with every passing moment. The man's chair creaked slightly, and Tasha froze, holding her breath. He didn't turn around. He didn't notice her presence. Her fingers tightened on the flash drive as the progress bar moved closer to completion. She couldn't afford to wait much longer. The door behind her suddenly creaked open, and Tasha's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes darted toward the entrance, but it was only a shadow passing through the doorway, another figure slipping into the warehouse. Her breath steadied, and she returned her focus to the screen, her mission now almost complete. The progress bar finally hit 100%, and Tasha swiftly pulled the flash drive from the computer. She turned toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed to get out, and she needed to get out now. But as she reached for the door handle, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Tasha's mind raced. She had to think quickly. Without a second thought, she slipped into the shadows, pressing her back against the cold wall, waiting for the footsteps to pass. The figure in the doorway stopped for a moment, scanning the room. Tasha held her breath, her body pressed tightly against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. The figure turned and walked away, their footsteps fading into the distance. Tasha let out a quiet sigh of relief. She had made it. She quickly exited the room and moved back toward the door, but before she could reach it, a low voice stopped her in her tracks. "I knew you'd be here." Tasha froze. The voice was familiar, too familiar. Marcus. He stepped out from the shadows, his eyes narrowing as he took in the flash drive in her hand. "You've got what we need?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. Tasha didn't answer immediately. Her mind raced, wondering what had brought him here, what he knew. He was supposed to be covering the outside, not here with her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her voice steady, though she could feel the tension building. Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze locking with hers. "I was just making sure you didn't miss anything," he said. His words sent a chill down her spine. Something wasn't right. She had always trusted Marcus, but in this moment, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "I got what we need," Tasha said, trying to keep her voice firm, even as the doubt started to creep in. She turned to leave, but Marcus stepped forward, blocking her path. "Not so fast," he said. His tone had shifted, becoming colder, more calculated. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't afford to make a mistake now. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. But Marcus was standing in her way, and she could see it in his eyes. This wasn't the same man she had trusted all these years. This was someone else, someone dangerous. She had to make a decision. Fight or run. And in that moment, she knew she had no choice but to find out the truth. She wasn't going down without a fight. The room was thick with tension. Tasha stood still, her hand still gripping the flash drive, as Marcus blocked her exit. His presence was overwhelming, but it wasn't the usual comfort she felt when working with him. There was something in his posture, something in the way he was looking at her now that felt different. She had always trusted him, relied on his instincts and calm demeanor, but today was different. "What's going on, Marcus?" she asked. Her voice steady despite the rising uncertainty in her chest. Marcus took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. His usual calm composure had been replaced with something darker, something almost predatory. "I think you already know, Tasha," he said softly, his tone cool but carrying an edge. "Know what?" Tasha's heart raced, her mind trying to piece together the situation. Had she missed something? Had she misread Marcus all this time? "I think you've been playing me, haven't you?" he said, his words coming out slowly, like he was savoring them. The air between them crackled with unspoken words. Tasha's instincts told her to stay calm, to keep her cool. She had been in worse situations, but this was different. Marcus was her partner, and yet there was something in the air now that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. "You've been working with them, haven't you?" Marcus asked, his voice hardening, a shift she hadn't anticipated. Tasha's breath caught in her throat. The weight of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. Working with them? The thought hadn't crossed her mind until now. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to keep the confusion out of her voice, but the doubt was beginning to creep in. Marcus's eyes flashed with something unreadable. Don't act like you don't know, Tasha. The syndicate, the deals you've been getting too close to. It all adds up, doesn't it? He took another step toward her, closing the space between them. Tasha felt a knot form in her stomach. Was he accusing her of something she didn't even understand? She had been working her hardest, keeping her head down, doing her job. But Marcus's words stung more than they should have. She knew the stakes were high in their line of work. There were always risks, always people willing to play dirty to get what they wanted. But she had never imagined Marcus would be one of those people. The person she had trusted more than anyone else in this line of work. I'm not working with them, Tasha said firmly, her voice strong despite the panic rising in her chest. She couldn't let him see that she was shaken, couldn't let him see that his words had left her reeling. Marcus just looked at her, his gaze cold, calculating. You're lying. I can see it in your eyes. You've been holding out on me, Tasha. All this time. Don't think I don't know what's going on. His voice was quiet now, but the venom in it was unmistakable. Tasha's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, trying to figure out how this had gone so wrong. The Marcus she knew would never accuse her of this without reason. But if that wasn't true, if he was really questioning her loyalty, then everything had changed. The flash drive in her hand felt like a burden now. She had done her job. She had followed the mission. But now, standing face to face with Marcus, she wasn't so sure of anything. You don't trust me? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. For a brief moment, Marcus's expression faltered, and Tasha saw a flicker of something behind his eyes. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the cold mask of someone who had made up his mind. I trusted you, Tasha, he said, his voice low. But now, I'm not so sure. The finality in his words struck her like a blow. This was no longer about the mission. This was about something deeper. Betrayal. Tasha could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. And for the first time, she wasn't sure how to get out of this one. She had trusted Marcus with everything, and now he was accusing her of betraying him. She didn't know how to fix this. She didn't know if she even could. Tasha took a deep breath, steadying herself. You're wrong, she said, her voice calm but firm. I'm not working with them. I've been working for you. For the team. For the mission. And if you can't see that, then maybe this partnership was a mistake. The words hit the air between them like a challenge. Marcus stood still for a moment, and for the first time, Tasha saw something like doubt flicker in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was there. I hope you're right, Marcus said, his voice quieter now, but still tinged with suspicion. Because if you're not, we're both in a lot of trouble. Tasha didn't reply. She just nodded, her grip tightening around the flash drive. She had to believe in her own innocence. She had to believe that the truth would come out. But in this moment, standing face to face with Marcus, the one person she had trusted above all others, the truth felt like a distant memory. She wasn't sure where to go from here. But she had to keep moving forward. For her, for the mission, for everything she had fought for. Whatever came next, she would face it head on. The warehouse was quiet again, but the tension in the air was palpable. Tasha stood at the threshold, the weight of the flash drive in her hand feeling heavier than it ever had before. Marcus had left, but his words echoed in her mind, twisting and turning like a knife in her gut. I trusted you, Tasha. But now, I'm not so sure. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the trust she had so carefully built was starting to crack. The uncertainty was gnawing at her, but she couldn't let it distract her now. She had a mission to complete. She had to keep going. She took a deep breath, trying to push the doubt aside. The mission wasn't over. There were answers to find, people to catch, and the syndicate wasn't going to wait for her to figure it out. She walked to the back of the warehouse, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. She didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing her off from the world outside. The faint hum of the city, the distant sounds of traffic, faded as she moved deeper into the building. The only sounds now were her own breathing, steady and calm. Her mind was focused. The operation was still in motion, and the clock was ticking. As she reached the back room, she checked her watch. It was almost time. She moved quickly, instinct guiding her steps as she approached the computer terminal that would give her the information she needed. She plugged the flash drive into the system, watching the screen flicker to life. The data was there, waiting for her. She clicked through the files, eyes scanning for the key pieces of information that would bring down the syndicate. It didn't take long. There it was. The file marked Project Blackout. She knew immediately that this was the one. She opened it and began downloading the contents onto the drive. The seconds felt like hours, but she didn't flinch. She was focused, every fiber of her being tuned to the task at hand. The download finished, and she disconnected the flash drive, tucking it safely into her jacket pocket. But as she turned to leave, a sound stopped her in her tracks. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was coming. Tasha's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't panic. She knew how to stay calm. She moved toward the far corner of the room, ducking into the shadows and holding her breath. The footsteps grew louder. She could hear them getting closer. The door to the room creaked open, and Tasha barely dared to move. The figure stepped inside, their silhouette just visible in the dim light. Tasha's eyes narrowed, trying to make out who it was. Then she heard the voice. "I know you're here, Tasha." The voice was calm, almost too calm. Her blood ran cold. Marcus. She could feel the tension in the room crackling like electricity. How had he found her? What was he doing here? She held her position, waiting, watching. He stepped farther into the room, his footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. He didn't seem surprised to find her there. He was just waiting for her to reveal herself. "You've been playing both sides, haven't you?" His voice was colder now, the suspicion and accusation clear in every word. Tasha's mind raced. How much did he know? Had he been watching her the whole time? Had he known that she was working against him? Or was this some kind of trap? She had to think fast. She couldn't let him know that he had caught her off guard. She couldn't let him see that she was rattled. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in her head. "I've been doing my job, and you've been lying to me." There was a long pause as Marcus's gaze seemed to lock onto her in the shadows. Tasha didn't move. She couldn't. If she made one wrong move, everything would unravel. "Lying to you," Marcus repeated, almost with a hint of disbelief. "I'm trying to save you, Tasha. You're playing a dangerous game. You've gone too deep." Tasha clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. "I'm not the one lying," she said, stepping out of the shadows, her eyes fixed on him. "You've been working for the syndicate this whole time, haven't you? You were always part of it." Marcus's eyes narrowed, and Tasha saw the briefest flicker of something. Maybe surprise, maybe anger, before it was gone. He was trying to mask it, but it wasn't enough. She could see through him. "You don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, his voice low. "You're making a mistake, Tasha. I'm trying to protect you from the mess you've gotten yourself into." Tasha's heart pounded in her chest. The words she had feared hearing for so long were finally being spoken aloud. She had been right. Marcus wasn't the man she thought he was. "You don't get to protect me anymore," she said firmly, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm done being manipulated." Marcus took a step closer, but Tasha didn't flinch. She stood her ground. She wasn't going to back down. Not now, not when she was so close. "I'm done with you," she said, her voice unwavering. "You're on the wrong side of this, and I'm going to stop you." The silence that followed was thick, the tension between them palpable. Neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. The moment stretched out, and Tasha knew that everything had changed. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Marcus's expression softened, but only for a moment. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said quietly. "Because when this is over, there's no coming back." Tasha didn't reply. She didn't need to. She was already moving, already walking away, heading for the door. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Whatever happened next, it was time to face the consequences of her choices. The streets were quiet, but Tasha's mind was racing. She had left the warehouse and Marcus behind, but the weight of everything he had said still lingered in her chest. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. As she drove through the city, the flashing lights of the cars around her blurred, but she barely noticed them. Her thoughts were consumed with what had happened, with Marcus's betrayal. How had she missed it? How had she not seen it before? The night air felt colder now, even though the temperature hadn't dropped. The sense of dread that had settled in her stomach after their confrontation seemed to grow with each passing mile. She had always believed in the mission, in the work that she did, but now it felt like everything was unraveling. She could still hear Marcus's voice in her head. "When this is over, there's no coming back." The words echoed, a constant reminder that the choices she had made had consequences. But there was no time for regret. Not now. Not when she was so close. She had the information, the evidence they needed to take down the syndicate, and that was all that mattered. The rest could wait. She had to focus. As she arrived at her apartment, she parked the car and sat there for a moment, the engine idling, her hands gripping the steering wheel. The quiet of the night was broken only by the hum of the engine, a stark contrast to the storm raging in her mind. She needed to think, to make a plan. She couldn't just sit here and let everything fall apart. The mission was still in play, and she had a job to finish. The sound of her phone vibrating against the dashboard interrupted her thoughts. It was a text message from an unknown number. "We know you're coming. Don't think you can stop this." Tasha's heart skipped a beat as she read the words. She had known this was coming. The closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. But this felt different. The threat was real, and whoever had sent it wasn't messing around. She grabbed the flash drive from her bag and held it tightly in her hand. The evidence was everything. It was the key to bringing down the syndicate. But now, she realized, it was also the target. She couldn't let anyone take it from her. Not now. Not when she was so close. The weight of the decision hit her hard. She had to act fast, but she couldn't afford to make a mistake. She glanced at the time. She had an hour, maybe less. The clock was ticking. Tasha quickly got out of the car and locked it behind her, her mind already running through her options. She needed to get the data to the right people, but she couldn't trust anyone in the department now. She had to go off the grid, at least for a while. She needed a safe place, somewhere she could think and plan without anyone watching her every move. Her apartment was the last place she wanted to be, so she grabbed her things and left, moving quickly and quietly. The city around her felt different now. It was still the same streets, the same people, but everything had changed. The uncertainty that had been lurking in the back of her mind was now front and center. She was on her own. She had to make sure the data made it to the right hands, but there was no telling who she could trust anymore. She couldn't afford to waste time, not with Marcus's betrayal hanging over her like a dark cloud. She kept moving through the streets, staying in the shadows, taking routes she knew would keep her off the radar. Every corner she turned, every step she took, she felt like she was being watched. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. The same instinct that had kept her alive all these years. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. As she made her way to the safe house, she couldn't help but think about the life she had led before all of this. The years of training, the dedication, the sacrifice. Was it all for nothing? Was the mission she had worked so hard for, the work she had believed in, just another lie? No, she wouldn't let it be. She couldn't. She had to finish what she started. She had to make sure the syndicate didn't win. She had to make sure the truth came out, no matter what it cost her. Tasha arrived at the safe house, a small, inconspicuous building tucked away on the outskirts of the city. She knocked 3 times, the rhythm of the knocks familiar. The door opened, and a man she didn't recognize stepped out. He was tall, with a stern face and sharp eyes that seemed to look right through her. "Tasha Lee," he asked, his voice low. "You have the data?" She nodded, holding out the flash drive. The man took it from her without a word, his gaze never leaving her face. Tasha felt a brief moment of relief. But it was fleeting. She didn't know who this man was, or who he worked for. But right now, he was her only option. "I'll get this to the right people," the man said, his tone serious. "You've done your part." Tasha nodded, her chest tight. She had done her part. Now all she could do was wait and hope. She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, the man spoke again. "Don't trust anyone. Not even us." Tasha stopped in her tracks. She didn't turn around, but she heard him close the door behind her. The warning lingered in the air, a chill that she couldn't shake. As she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right choice. Had she just handed over the one thing that could destroy everything she had fought for? The thought gnawed at her as she disappeared into the night, alone and uncertain, but still determined to see this through to the end. The city was still, a blanket of quiet that felt heavier than usual. Tasha moved through the streets, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts, questions, and uncertainties. She hadn't looked back after leaving the safe house, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The man had taken the flash drive, but she had no idea where it was going or who would ultimately use the information. The weight of the decision to trust him pressed on her, but she had no other choice. At least for now, The data was in safer hands than her own. As she walked, Tasha couldn't help but replay the last few days in her mind, the choices that had led her here. The betrayal by Marcus, the doubts, the accusations, it was all too much. And yet, she kept moving forward. She had no other option. As she passed the familiar streets of the city, she noticed the change. The world around her felt different now, less predictable, more dangerous. The weight of her mission had never been heavier. But it wasn't just about the syndicate anymore. It was about trust, about loyalty, about everything she had believed in. She reached her apartment and stopped in front of the door, her fingers hovering over the lock. She hadn't been home in days, and the emptiness of her apartment felt like the silence that had consumed her thoughts. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, but the moment she crossed the threshold, she felt it. A presence. Someone was here. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She wasn't alone. Tasha's eyes scanned the room, her hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. She moved carefully, her training kicking in as she silently moved through the apartment. The faint sound of movement came from the living room. She crept closer, her breath steady, every step calculated. As she rounded the corner, she saw him. Marcus. He was standing by the window, his back to her. "I thought I told you not to trust anyone," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. Tasha froze, her heart skipping a beat. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice cold. Marcus didn't turn around. "I came to see if you were still on the right side," he replied. "I thought I was clear about that." Tasha's mind raced, but she couldn't let him see the fear. She couldn't let him see the doubt that was creeping back in. "You don't get to decide that for me," she said firmly. "You've already made your choice." Marcus finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Have I? Or have you?" Tasha stood still, her gaze fixed on him. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she had to keep her focus. "You don't get to turn this around on me," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the tension in her body. "You made your choice when you walked away from the team." Marcus's eyes softened for a moment, but the mask quickly returned. "You don't know the whole story, Tasha. You never did." Tasha took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. "Then tell me. All of it." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then sighed, as if the weight of what he had to say was too much. "I never wanted you to be involved in this," he said quietly. "But the deeper you got, the harder it became to keep you out." Tasha's heart raced as she tried to process his words. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Marcus looked at her, his eyes dark with regret. "The syndicate isn't just some criminal organization. It's a network, a system that runs deeper than you realize. I've been working with them to take it down from the inside." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. "You've been working with them?" she whispered, the shock in her voice unmistakable. "All this time?" Marcus nodded, the weight of his admission settling between them. "Yes, but I've always had one goal, to bring it down. From the inside. But it's complicated, Tasha. You wouldn't understand." Tasha took a step back, the words hitting her like a punch. "I don't understand," she repeated, her voice shaking. "I'm the one who's been working day and night to take them down, and you've been playing both sides?" Marcus sighed again, his gaze filled with pain. "I had to do it this way, Tasha. If I'd brought you in on everything, you would have been a target. You've been so focused on the mission that you didn't see the bigger picture. I'm trying to protect you, even if you don't see it that way." Tasha's eyes burned with anger and disbelief. "You've been protecting me? By lying to me? By putting me in danger?" She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Marcus was the one person she had trusted without question, and now everything felt like a lie. "I didn't want this to happen," Marcus said, his voice low. "But we're running out of time. The syndicate knows we're closing in on them. They're going to make their move soon, and we have to be ready." Tasha stood in silence, her mind spinning. "What do you want from me, Marcus?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his expression softened with something like regret. "I want you to trust me again," he said. "I want you to help me finish this. Together." Tasha shook her head, her chest tight with the weight of everything he had said. "I don't know if I can," she said softly. "You've already made your choice." There was a long silence as the tension between them grew. "I haven't made my choice," Marcus replied, his voice quiet but firm. "Not yet. But I need your help, Tasha. We're in this together, whether you want to admit it or not." Tasha stared at him, her heart torn. She had always believed in the mission, in the fight for justice. But now, standing here with Marcus, she didn't know what to believe anymore. The tension in the room was suffocating, but Tasha stood her ground. Marcus's words echoed in her mind, each one a dagger twisting deeper into her confidence. "We're in this together," he had said, "whether you want to admit it or not." But how could she believe him now? How could she trust the man who had been hiding so much from her? The silence between them stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, but Tasha refused to look away. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything you've said, it doesn't make sense. You were supposed to be my partner, Marcus. We were supposed to be on the same side." Marcus's face softened for a moment, but the hardness quickly returned. "I never wanted it to be like this," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But the deeper we got, the more dangerous it became. I couldn't risk you getting hurt. I had to make sure you didn't get involved in the worst of it." Tasha's mind raced. She had always trusted Marcus, believed in their partnership. But now she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had been a lie. He had been working from the inside, trying to take down the syndicate, but at what cost? How many lies had he told her along the way? How much of it had been for his own gain? "So all this time," Tasha began, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal, "you've been lying to me, using me as a pawn in your game?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at her, his gaze intense, but there was something behind it that she couldn't place. Was it guilt? Regret? She couldn't tell. "I never used you," he said finally. "I just wanted to protect you. From everything. From the syndicate. From the truth." Tasha clenched her fists, feeling the weight of his words crashing down on her. Protect her? From the truth? How could he protect her by keeping her in the dark? "You don't get to decide what I'm protected from," she snapped, her voice sharp. "I'm not a child, Marcus. I can handle myself." The words were out before she could stop them, but they felt true. She had always prided herself on her independence, her ability to face danger head-on. She didn't need Marcus to shield her from the world. She could handle it herself. "I never wanted you to get hurt," Marcus said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "I didn't want this for you. But now we're too deep." "Too deep," Tasha repeated, her voice rising. "You mean it's too late to back out now, right?" She crossed her arms, feeling the anger bubble up inside her. "You've dragged me into this mess, and now you're trying to make me believe that it's too late to fix things." Marcus didn't respond. He just stood there, his face unreadable, like he was weighing something heavy in his mind. Tasha could see the conflict in his eyes, the internal struggle that was playing out behind his stoic facade. But she couldn't bring herself to care. She had trusted him, and he had betrayed her. "You think I don't know what's at stake?" Tasha continued, her words coming faster now, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. "I've been in this fight from the start. I've seen things you don't even know about. But I've always had my eyes open. I've never been blinded by the mission like you." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm done with this, Marcus. I'm done with your lies, with your manipulations. I'm not your partner anymore. I don't know who you are, but it's not the person I thought I knew." Marcus's eyes flashed, his jaw tightening. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low, almost warning her. "You don't understand what's happening here. The syndicate is more dangerous than you realize. If we don't finish this, if we don't take them down from the inside, they'll destroy everything." Tasha shook her head. "No, you've been playing this game for too long, and I'm done. I'm taking the information and making sure it gets into the right hands. You can either help me, or you can stay out of my way." Marcus stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You think you can do this without me?" he asked, his voice rough, his frustration evident. "You think you can take down the syndicate on your own?" Tasha met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "I don't need you anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Marcus stood still for a moment, the tension between them thickening. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said over his shoulder, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had said before. Tasha didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the door he had walked through, feeling the sting of his departure like a wound reopening. But she couldn't afford to feel sorry for herself. She had a mission to complete, and she wasn't going to let anything, or anyone, stop her. She turned to face the window, her reflection staring back at her. She didn't recognize the person she saw, but she knew one thing for certain. She was stronger than she had ever been before, and she wasn't going to let Marcus's betrayal define her. She had made it this far on her own, and she would finish this alone if she had to. The stakes were too high. The truth needed to come out, and no matter what it cost her, she would make sure it did. The night had a strange calmness to it, the kind of stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath. Tasha sat at the small desk in her apartment, the only light in the room coming from the computer screen in front of her. The data was all there, every file she had risked everything for, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a weight. The words Marcus had said echoed in her mind, the warning that had stuck with her. You don't understand what's happening here. The syndicate is more dangerous than you realize. He had been right about one thing. The stakes were higher than she had anticipated. The deeper she got, the more dangerous it became. She stared at the screen, the lines of code and files almost blurring together. The file titled Project Blackout was open, and she was looking at everything she needed to bring down the syndicate. The truth was there, but the path to making it public wasn't as simple as clicking a button. She had learned that the hard way. The phone on the desk buzzed, breaking her concentration. She reached for it instinctively, her heart racing for a split second before she saw the number on the screen. It was an unknown number, but her gut told her it wasn't someone she could trust. Hesitating only for a moment, she answered the call. Tasha Lee. A voice said, the words sharp, professional. We need to talk. The voice was unfamiliar, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't someone calling to check in on her progress. This was someone with a purpose. Who is this? She asked, her voice steady despite the unease growing in her chest. Let's just say I'm someone who's very interested in the data you have. The voice replied, cold and to the point. You're a step away from making a mistake you won't be able to take back. Tasha's grip tightened on the phone. The threat was clear, and the feeling of being trapped intensified. It was one thing to be chased by the syndicate, but this, whoever this was, had taken things to a whole new level. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice firm. She couldn't afford to show weakness now. What's in the data is important, the voice said, but it's not the only thing you're carrying. I suggest you meet us if you want to keep breathing. The call ended abruptly, and Tasha stared at the phone for a long moment. Her heart was pounding in her chest. The words echoed in her mind, a dangerous mix of fear and determination. She didn't have a choice. Whoever this was knew too much, and she couldn't risk leaving them with the upper hand. She stood up from the desk, pacing across the room. The city outside was quiet, the lights casting long shadows across the streets. She had no idea who was behind the phone call, but it didn't matter. She had to go. There was no other choice. The information she held was far too valuable, and if it fell into the wrong hands, everything she had worked for would be wasted. She grabbed her jacket and checked the time. It was late, too late for anyone to be on the streets, but she wasn't about to let that stop her. She couldn't waste any more time. As she walked out of her apartment, she felt the familiar weight of the flash drive in her pocket, the one piece of leverage she still had. The night air was cool, biting, but it didn't matter. The mission had to be completed. She had no idea who she was meeting, but they knew where she was, and they knew what she had. She couldn't afford to trust anyone anymore, not even herself. She had learned that the hard way. The walk to the meeting point felt longer than it should have. Her mind raced, trying to anticipate what was going to happen next. Every step was another risk, another chance for things to go wrong. When she finally reached the location, a dark alley between two buildings, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The alley was empty, save for the trash scattered along the ground, and the dim light from a single street lamp that barely illuminated the path ahead. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, but nothing could shake the tension gnawing at her. She was exposed, vulnerable, and she didn't even know who her enemy was. As she stood there, waiting, she heard a noise from behind her. It was subtle at first, but it grew louder as someone stepped closer. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. You came, the voice from the phone said, a little too pleased. She turned around slowly, her eyes scanning the shadows, but she still couldn't see the person. Show yourself, she demanded, her voice strong despite the fear creeping up her spine. Don't worry, the voice replied, the calmness only making her more uneasy. You'll see us soon enough. A figure emerged from the darkness, stepping into the dim light. The person was tall, their face hidden behind a mask, but the presence was unmistakable. This was no ordinary contact. "What do you want from me?" Tasha asked again, her voice steady but tense. "We want the data," the figure said, taking a step closer. "You're the only one who has it. You've crossed a line, Tasha. But if you give us what we want, we'll leave you alone. Simple as that." Tasha's pulse quickened, and the words stung. Leave her alone? She had already crossed too many lines to turn back. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She couldn't hand over the data. Not now, not after everything she had fought for. But could she survive this game? Could she outsmart them, like she had with everyone else? She didn't know, but she was going to try. "I'm not giving you anything," she said, her voice firm. "Not now, not ever." The figure's eyes narrowed behind the mask, the tension between them thickening. "You're making a mistake," the voice warned. "You have no idea who you're up against." Tasha's breath caught in her throat, but she stood tall. She had no idea who she was up against, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down. The figure in front of her stepped closer, his masked face a constant reminder of the danger she was in. Tasha could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but her mind was sharp. She couldn't afford to let her fear show. The man's presence was suffocating, but she wouldn't back down. "You're making a mistake," the voice said again, this time colder, more threatening. "We've been watching you, Tasha. We know what you've been up to. You can't hide from us." Tasha's grip tightened on the flash drive in her pocket. It was the only thing that mattered now. It was everything. She wasn't about to hand it over. "I'm not giving you anything," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension. "Not now, not ever." The figure didn't move for a moment, and the silence between them grew thick. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, closing the gap between them. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice like ice. "The data is ours. Whether you want to cooperate or not doesn't matter. You'll give it to us, or we'll take it." Tasha's mind raced, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. She had a plan, but she couldn't afford to make a mistake. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, an opportunity. The alley was empty, no one around to help. She was on her own, but she had always known she would be. She had always trusted herself to get through situations like this. And she wasn't about to let anyone change that now. "You think I'm scared of you?" she asked, her voice sharp. The figure's eyes narrowed. "You should be." He reached out toward her, his gloved hand outstretched. Tasha stepped back, her hand instinctively brushing against the cold wall behind her. She had to act fast. Without thinking, she spun around, ducking low and quickly moving to the side. The man's hand missed her by inches as she pushed herself away, her legs carrying her farther into the alley. She could hear the sound of his footsteps following her, but she wasn't looking back. She couldn't afford to. She sprinted down the narrow alley, her heart racing, her breath coming faster. The sound of pursuit grew louder, but she didn't slow down. She turned the corner sharply, then another, zigzagging through the back streets of the city. She knew these streets, knew the alleyways, the shortcuts. She had to lose him. She had to stay ahead. She reached a street corner and paused for just a moment, her eyes scanning for any sign of the man. She didn't see him yet. The moment of reprieve was brief, but it gave her the chance she needed. She ducked into a small, dark doorway on the side of a building, pressing her back against the wall and holding her breath. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, and she held her position, waiting for the danger to pass. Her mind raced as she considered her options. The flash drive in her pocket was still there, and that was all that mattered. She had to get the information out, no matter what it took. She couldn't let these people win. They wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, and Tasha knew she couldn't trust anyone in the department anymore. Not after everything that had happened. Her thoughts drifted back to Marcus, and the weight of his betrayal still stung. She had trusted him, but he had chosen his own path. She had to be smarter than that. She couldn't let herself be caught in someone else's game. She had to play her own. She waited in the dark doorway, the tension thick in the air. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps receded into the distance. Tasha took a deep breath, her muscles aching from the sprint, but the relief was short-lived. She couldn't stay here for long. They would be looking for her. She had to keep moving. She pulled the collar of her jacket up around her neck and stepped out of the doorway, keeping low and out of sight. Her mind was already calculating her next move. She had to get back to the safe house, find somewhere to lay low for a while. She had to get the information to the right people, and she couldn't do that if she was caught. As she moved through the streets, her pace quickened. The city was still, the usual noise of traffic and chatter nowhere to be found in the dead of night. But that didn't matter. What mattered was getting to safety. She needed to clear her head, make a plan. The words from the phone call earlier came back to her. "You're carrying more than just data," the voice had said. What did they mean by that? Was it a warning or something more? She had been working for so long to bring down the syndicate, but now it felt like she was being swept into something bigger than she had anticipated. The weight of the flash drive in her pocket felt heavier with each passing step. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. She had made it this far. She had to finish what she started. She turned onto another street, her footsteps echoing in the silence. But this time, she didn't look over her shoulder. She couldn't afford to. She was too close to the end. She could feel it. The next move would be critical. She had to make sure the syndicate wouldn't get away with everything they had done. She had to stop them, no matter what. And she was going to do it alone. The cold wind cut through the empty streets as Tasha moved quickly, her steps sure and deliberate. The city felt like a maze now, each turn a reminder that she was on her own. The weight of the flash drive in her pocket pressed against her side, a constant reminder of everything she had risked and lost. She had left everything behind. Marcus, the team, the department, and now she was truly alone. But in some ways, it felt like a relief. There were no more lies, no more betrayals. She was taking control of her own fate. The night seemed darker than usual as she navigated the alleyways and side streets, the familiar landmarks now just shadows in her peripheral vision. The threat from the phone call still lingered in her mind, but she couldn't afford to let it distract her. The data was too important. She had to keep moving forward. She reached the small, unmarked building she had designated as her temporary safe house. It was nothing special, just a nondescript building on the edge of the city, a place where she could lay low and plan her next move. She pushed the door open slowly, stepping inside and locking it behind her. The interior was sparse, just a few old chairs and a table with a lamp. But it was enough. The silence in the room was overwhelming, but Tasha embraced it. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could think clearly. She pulled the flash drive from her pocket and plugged it into the laptop. The screen flickered to life, and the files began to load. She had seen some of the data already, but she needed to know everything, every last detail. The files were dense, filled with names, dates, and locations, but there was one thing that stood out. Project Blackout. It was a name she had seen before, and now she was staring at the full scope of it. The operation wasn't just a single mission. It was a network, a plan that spanned countries and involved far more than just the syndicate. Tasha's heart raced as she scrolled through the documents. This wasn't just about taking down a criminal organization. This was about exposing a global network of corruption, deceit, and power. She had to act fast. She couldn't waste any more time. As she sifted through the files, something caught her eye, a name that she had heard before. Marcus. Her stomach twisted as she read the information on the screen. Marcus had been involved in something much larger than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just about taking down the syndicate. He was tied to something deeper, something darker. The betrayal ran deeper than she had thought. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath. She had trusted Marcus. She had believed in him. And now, everything she had worked for felt like a lie. The truth was right in front of her, and it was too much to process all at once. She had to make a decision. Could she go to the authorities? Could she trust anyone anymore? She knew she couldn't trust the department, not after everything that had happened. She had seen enough to know that even those who seemed loyal weren't always who they appeared to be. But what choice did she have? She couldn't go it alone forever. The consequences of failure were too high. She had to finish what she started. Tasha sat back in the chair, her mind racing. She had come so far, but now she was at a crossroads. She could give the data to the authorities and hope they could handle it, or she could take matters into her own hands and expose the truth herself. Either way, there was no going back. She looked back at the files, her eyes scanning the names and locations, trying to find the right path forward. The data was more than just information. It was the key to bringing down the whole operation. But it would take more than just giving it to the right people. She needed to ensure it got into the hands of those who would use it properly. She needed to make sure the syndicate didn't have the chance to cover their tracks. As she closed the laptop, Tasha knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, she had to be the one to make it happen. She wasn't going to let anyone else decide her fate. She wasn't going to let Marcus's betrayal define her. She had the power now. She had the truth. And she wasn't going to stop until she saw this through to the end. The city outside was quiet, but Tasha felt the storm inside her, the weight of the decisions she had made. But it didn't matter. She had made her choice. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready for whatever came next.